So if we keep on focusing on owning the sea, instead of focusing on what's best for the sea, none of us would fully enjoy the blessings of this sea. Thank you.
And all the way from Europe, the third most important blogger in Philippine history, a true blue powerhouse in terms of everything social media, and a worldwide transgender advocate. She spoke at the United Nations, an impressive human being, and my good friend, superstar Sass Rogando Sasot. Ladies and gentlemen, the debate between Sass Rogando Sasot and Richard Heydarian starts right now.
First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers of this event for making this happen. This is not an easy feat to make, and Richard and I both know how difficult this is to mount emotionally, psychologically, financially, and in a lot of different ways. Ang isa sa mga pinaka sikat nating salawikain sa ating sariling wika ay ang hindi marunong lumingon sa kanyang pinanggalingan ay hindi makararating sa paroroonan, which is, those who cannot look back to where they came from, cannot go to where they should go, right? They cannot reach their destination. And this saying is about historical estrangement, or our tendency to treat the present moment as if it exists in a vacuum and wasn't shaped by events in the past. We were asked to shape our opening speech according to the question of why we're here. And we are here because of what happened in the past, right? We are here because of the intense political divisions that's happening in our country right now that was brought by the election of President Duterte. For better or for worse, he changed our country. He changed our country by lifting the veil of hypocrisy that is shrouding our country for years and years and years. And for the very first time, we are looking at each other as who we really are with each other, right? We are very passionate people as Filipinos. And that's why in social media, we treat each other as if we would like to kill each other. But in reality, that's just how we relate to each other, right? I lived for a long time in the Philippines, and one of the comments that Dutch people tell me whenever I talk to them is that they feel that I'm a really very intense person, when in fact, that's just how we communicate with each other. So I think that a lot of things that are happening right now in our country is brought by who we are as Filipinos and who we are as people, as shaped by our history, shaped by 300 years of colonization by the Spaniards, half a decade or so by the Americans, and 3 or 4 years or so by the Japanese. We have been shaped as people who should be subjugated. And for the first time, we have a president who's telling us that we shouldn't be subjugated, right? And he's telling this through a really violent discourse, right? He curses, right? He say these things to the Catholic Church. And he really uses crude language against politicians that we all know really fucked us up as a people. So why am I here? Personally, I'm here because I am reclaiming a lost tradition, a lost time in Philippine history when transgender people were treated with dignity. Before Spanish colonization, we were spiritual leaders. We were artists. We were political advisors to political leaders. Why am I here? As a citizen of the Philippines, because like Richard Heydarian, I believe that we should take our political discourse to a different level, a level that would not lead us to more nihilism, but to a level that would make us understand that what binds us as a people is our future, and our future is shaped by our past. Why am I here? As an academic, I'm here because I have a responsibility to inform people that what we are going through right now has a long history, and that history must be teased out so that we would be able to understand why we are here. And through that understanding, we would fully know and would have a better idea where we should go as a people, as a country, and most of all, as human beings, united by one thing, and that is the desire to give a better future for the next generation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to a really fruitful discussion, debate, and conversation. All of those things would happen tonight. So I look forward to that.
Sass. Okay, tama na yung buzzer. He stopped na. So, Sass, 3 minutes. Everything you hate about Richard.
Well, there's only one thing that I hate about Richard, and I'm gonna say something from an academic perspective. What I don't like about Richard when the way he writes, because I read both of his books. I do not criticize someone when I don't read their work, right? I read both of his books from cover to cover, and what I don't appreciate is his historical omissions, right? And I understand why he's doing that, because he's analyzing something from a particular way. He is analyzing. It's analysis from the present, right? And he is looking at the dynamics at the present time. But for me, raised on a tradition that must take into account, history, you must take into account what happened in the past and how the present moment has been shaped. One particular work of Richard that I noticed it was his last book, right? It was elegantly written. I wouldn't deny Richard Heydarian's rhetorical skills. He is really good at it. But he missed something about profiling the personality of Duterte. When I look at his references, he never referenced any Davao historian. And this was also actually raised to me by Mindanaoan historian Carlo Antonio Galay David. Shout out. Nanonood siya ngayon. And he told me that, Richard Heydarian could have consulted, for example, Macario Chu. And he's like a prominent Davao historian. And, perhaps in the next iteration of Heydarian's book, that's what the good thing about works like this. You can always develop it. It's always a work in progress. Yes, exactly. And then maybe he could incorporate those things and how they help shape Duterte now. Because, it was the first book. To be fair with Heydarian, it's the first book about profiling Duterte, what shaped his decision-making today. And being the first one to do it, you would always leave out a lot of important things, right? So maybe in the second version, he could consult, Mindanao historians.
Or you?
No, not me, because I'm not an expert in Mindanao history. There are Mindanao historians who could help him provide a better psycho-historical profile of Duterte.
She is among few people who bother to actually read and actually critique it. And for me, that's respect. That's intellectual respect.
Hello. Well, I think what I like the most about Richard is that he's very, very, very good in managing his public persona. When it wait a second. No, when it comes to writing and etc. When you have a public face, I don't know if any one of you know this. I used to be the personal assistant of Bibi Gananghari. I was her PA for like 2-3 months. And, you know, she's a celebrity, and before she opens her mouth to the public, she has her entire team, or not entire team, I was with her, or etc., to manage, you know, what she put out in the public, because it's very difficult for you to be saying the same thing or doing the wrong things and giving out the wrong impressions. And I think Richard was fairly good in managing his public persona, right? He appears civil, he puts out himself out there most of the time.
Stop it. Behave.
No, he appears civil, he dresses well, right? He dresses well. So I think he did it well, right? And it wasn't something that I didn't really do well in the last 3 years, because I was like telling this to some of people close to me that I never expected to be in a position that I am right now. I came from the underground. My audience was like really a niche audience. I came from a really, really marginalized discourse community. And there I can be myself, right? It's like the Vice Ganda thing, right? The joke about Jessica Soho. When he did it, it wasn't received well. But if you say it in a particular discourse community, they wouldn't give shit about it, right? Because you know each other. So I'm used to that kind of community wherein people know you intimately, and whatever that you do is, you know, they could give it a pass. And so I wasn't really good in managing my public persona, because I still thought that I am still communicating with people that I know. So there were a lot of times that I wish that I could have been more finesse in using the power or influence or what have you that has been given to me by chance. And that chance was, of course, Thinking Pinoy was a very, very huge. He contributed to make that chance happen. He was the one behind everything that you're experiencing right now. So even him, like he was telling me that be more gracious. But I had never experienced being gracious in talking to people. So yeah, so that's the thing that I like Richard the most. He was so good in managing your public persona.
I really should.
Our first topic for today is everything about Philippine and China relations. From the South China Sea conflict to the loans and what have you. So I would like to begin my position on this issue with this map. Akala nyo, akala ni Richard siya yung sinasabot, at ako pa. Okay, this map was a late 17th century map, right? It's popularly called the Selden map after its owner, John Selden. So it's a Chinese map, right? It's a Chinese map. And John Selden is a British guy. He was responsible for the principle called Mare Colossum, which is the foundation of the concept of territorial sea, that you can actually appropriate the sea as land, right? It's one of the foundational principles of that. And this map is actually interesting because during the time, and even now, when a country constructs a map, they're always at the center. And what's interesting about this Chinese map is that China is not at the center of the map, but what? Nakikita nyo pa? Hindi. Ano pa palabuin nyo pa? No, the center of the map is actually the sea, the South China Sea. That's why it's like a very interesting artifact of history to reflect on. Because this is the only map made in China that never had China as its center, right? So what does this tell us? How the sea is an important thing in the relationship among these different communities during the time. Because during the time that this map was made, trade was the number one way of relating to each other. And the sea was not a source of division. just like what it is now, but it was a source of unity, cooperation, exchange. And this happened before European colonization happened, before the ideas of territory, of the sea being appropriated as land infected our minds because of European colonization. And this past, I believe, should be one of the things that we should put forward in the current discourse that is dominating right now about the conflict. Because the conflict is all about owning a piece of the sea, right? Owning, it's either the sea owning most of the sea, or the Philippines parcelizing the sea, or Vietnam owning as much as the sea as China is currently owning. And I think this is a discourse that we should put forward out there. And instead of criticizing China for, of course, the fictional account that it owns the sea, we should read history with it. That the sea, during most of at that time, wasn't owned by anyone. It was a source of our cooperation, of our exchange. It is the thing that bind us together, that separate us. And that thing should be at the center of our diplomatic relationship with China. So instead of foregoing history and focusing on what we have right now, which is just a product of the changes that happen in this region that actually produce the conflict. What are those changes? Our understanding of territory, of understanding of the sea that could be appropriated as land, and through that, we now have the concept of exclusive economic zones. And these concepts, they don't lead us to a better relationship with our neighbors. Instead, it kept on dividing us, and it kept us on putting at the center the most important interest in this conflict. It is not the interest of Vietnam. It is not the interest of China. And definitely it is not the interest of the Philippines. That is the most important interest that we should consider in this conflict. And which interest is that? It is the interest of the sea. Because the sea doesn't understand the concept of EEZ, of territory. It only understands one thing, and that is its ecological health. Right now, the number one problem of the South China Sea is overfishing. Second is plastic pollution. And you know who are among the top three polluters of the sea? Number one is China. Number two is Indonesia. Number three is our country. So if we keep on focusing on owning the sea, instead of focusing on what's best for the sea, none of us would fully enjoy the blessings of this sea. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Richard Heydarian. You made my job easy. Okay. First, I would like to address the issue of militarization of the South China Sea. The militarization of the South China Sea didn't happen now. It happened a long time ago. The militarization of South China Sea happened the moment Europeans colonized all of these communities around the South China Sea. The militarization happened then. The militarization happened when the Dutch and the Portuguese fought over the Strait of Malacca. The militarization happened when the British and the French sent their warships there. The militarization happened when Japan occupied one of the features of the South China Sea, and that is Spratlys for its guano. The militarization happened in the South China Sea when the Americans kept on, I would like to emphasize it, kept on until this day, kept on using the South China Sea as its transit points for its warships, oftentimes equipped with nuclear weapons. So blaming only one country for militarization and blaming China for starting the militarization is historically incorrect, right? China is actually responding to the militarization that has been going on in the sea. As I mentioned earlier, this sea before served as a channel for trade. The only thing that these communities were concerned of during those times is battling pirates, right? In Hong Kong, there is a painting out there. I forgot who the artist is because I forgot the name. I cannot pronounce Chinese name. It's in Hong Kong. It was during Ming Dynasty. It was a ship battling a pirate in the South China Sea. It was a how do you call it, Chinese ships during that time. So it was a Chinese ships battling pirates in the South China Sea, right? That was their major concern during that time. It's not about owning the sea and militarizing it. It is facilitating the trade in the South China Sea. The militarization happened when the notion of territory invaded this order, right? The traditional order during that time was an open trade, right? I studied in Leiden University, right? It is where Hugo Grotius studied. Hugo Grotius is like the father of international law. The concept of free seas was attributed to him. And it was strongly attributed to him because he came up with that concept in order to defend what the Dutch was doing against the Portuguese during that time, right? Hugo Grotius copied the notion of free seas in this order during the time, right? Before these Americans kept on insisting on freedom of navigation was the traditional order in our community. What changed this? What changed this is the meddling of outside powers in this traditional order. And that meddling, especially by the United States, under the guise of freedom of navigation operations, is actually worsening the situation, right? The opposition kept on saying, what about Indonesia? Indonesia keep on blowing up Chinese fishermen vessels, but China is not launching a war against Indonesia. Interesting case, right? Why? Why do you think China is not launching a war against Indonesia? What do you think? No, the thing here is Indonesia is perceived by everyone as acting on its own interest. It is not perceived as a puppet of any superpower. The Philippines is perceived even by Asian countries as a puppet of the United States, right? So when we act, the hawks, right? The hawks in China thinks that we are just being the mouthpiece of the empire, right? It is thinking, the hawks in China are thinking that we are acting in the interest of the United States rather than in our own interest. Because what is our best interest? Our best interest is to have a South China Sea as it was before, marked by open trade relationship. It is not, it is a different kind of relationship than what we have right now, dominated by military interests. It's not just the military interest of China that's dominating the South China, it's also the military interest of the United States. Richard Heydarian mentioned earlier the first and second China Island strategy, but the second China Island strategy has a precedent, and that is the first island chain strategy of the United States. And that first island strategy of the United States, Philippines, our country, is part of the defensive perimeter of the United States. What does it mean? What does it mean? I'm going to use an analogy that's familiar to you. You know Captain America, right? So the first island strategy was crafted during the Cold War. It was mentioned by, i-fact check nyo ako, verify, but I think it was mentioned by Dean Acheson in a speech. And he said that the first island, that they should maintain this defensive perimeter in the Pacific Theater, starting from the Aleutian Islands, Taiwan, and of course going to the Philippines. What does it mean? Because the strategy of the United States is this: to make sure that no war reaches its shore. And how does it do that? It forms these bases that could stop its potential threat to its national security.
Okay.
And the United States and the Philippines is that shield against the United States, right? And as like the shield of Captain America, it is often the target of the threat, right? So this first island strategy, I think, should have been unpacked more by Heydarian. What does it mean to us?
Okay.
First of all, it's important to understand why China is behaving this way, right? If you would like to defeat your enemy, you should fully know why your enemy is defeating this way. And the last administration really had a poor understanding of why China was behaving that way, because I don't think any one of them speaks Mandarin. Remember? The ambassador that they tried to send to Beijing didn't even know the difference between soft power and hard power. Didn't even understand what diplomacy was. So that was how incompetent the last administration was. And I just like to respond to not blaming the Aquino administration for what's happening right now. During one of the press conference in Malacanang featuring the fishermen at Scarborough Shoal, the fishermen themselves in Scarborough Shoal mentioned this, that between 2000 and 2012, they never experienced the trouble that they experienced in 2012. So I think that speaks volume already, right? Of when all these conflict and trouble that we're experiencing is happening, right? It was a policy fault of the previous administration. Why suddenly the fisherman is having the trouble? Why did it happen during Gloria's time? Why did it happen during Aquino's time? I think we should reflect more on that. Second, Heydarian says that because the current administration is using sovereignty in territory, we should use it. I think that's unforgivable. We are academics. We shouldn't just rely on what the government is saying. We know what these terms mean, right? And it is our duty to make sure that they are using the right terms and not confusing our people. And I understand that the government is just good. You know, when you work in government, you cannot really deviate radically from what the previous government is doing. So you continue the discourse. So I'm sure that they are doing this because they're also as lost as everyone when it comes to these terms, because this was never explained to us during that time.
Time's up.
It was times.
Sige, finish your thought.
Yeah.
Finish your
Wrap
last
up.
thought.
Okay, I'm just gonna wrap. Just give me a minute. Okay. To end, I'm an international relations person. My concern is to create an environment, an international environment that is conducive for us to pursue our interests. And our interests cannot be pursued based on our fundamentalist view on things. Why? Because we are not the only one in the world. Our interest is moderated by other interests in international relations. We can only pursue our interests when we reconcile it with the interests of other actors in the international system. And I think that the past administration wasn't good at doing that. And is this administration better? I think it's better in a bit, but I wish it could do more in order to do that. How? It could have strengthened its diplomatic initiatives by deepening the diplomatic relations between the two countries. And that entails informing the public of what is going on. Because right now, the media is dominating the discourse, and I am here trying to warn all of you that we are now entering a very critical phase wherein we are fomenting a very racist discourse that could easily snowball into a country that could commit genocide against another race.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
what is the best solution for all of the claimants, including China, I think, from your question, Philippines, Malaysia, China, to the dispute?
Well, for me, the best solution to the dispute is to follow the Arctic model, right? The Arctic model, people, the countries around you know the Arctic, right? It's on top of on top. It's the Arctic Sea, and it's literal countries like Finland, Russia, United States, etc. Right? And right now they are shelving sovereignty claims. Right? They are also fighting over sovereignty about a lot of areas there. But right now they are focusing on making sure that the Arctic Sea's ecology is preserved and maintained, and of course, on cooperation on a lot of issues surrounding the environment, right? And they have instituted a multilateral organization called the Arctic Council. And the Arctic Council, and what's good about that model is that it's not only based on states. Hindi lang mga estado yung pwedeng sumali, pati na rin yung mga communities, mga indigenous communities. So you have states, and then you have observers ng mga indigenous communities that they can suggest things on how to improve the situation, especially the environmental situation. So I think that is the best model right now that we could adopt when it comes to the South China Sea. Kasi for me, as I mentioned earlier, this conflict was actually caused by the idea of territory, right? And sovereign rights, etc. It will not solve the problem if we keep on pursuing that line, right? We will not have a cooperative relationship because those discourses, those categories encourages division. So we must create a new discourse that encourages cooperation, unity, and a new identity. I wrote this in my column in Manila Times before, that we should develop a new identity based on the sea, right? In our country, our identity is based on the land. Kabayan. Bayan is etymologically means land. So maybe we should develop a kadagat, right? People belonging to the same sea. And all these countries belong to the same sea. And we should keep on emphasizing that. To wrap this, Falicis already looking at me, wrap this thing. In the 16th century, there is this king in one of the pre-colonial Indonesian states, King Gowa the 14th. I-fact check no kung tama, but King Gowa something. Sultan Aladdin or something like that. The Dutch would like to monopolize the spice trade. Right? They would like to close the sea. And the king told him that the land you can own. I'm paraphrasing this. But the sea, it's unheard of that you can own it. It is free for all. So maybe Duterte could change his narrative and take China to task. Not just China, but all the claimants to task. Right? Remind them of that very, very telling phrase from that pre-colonial Indonesian state king, that in our region, the traditional order is not owning the sea, but about sharing it.
Okay. On the domestic issues, at least the two issues, please comment about federalism and the war on drugs. Richard, 10 minutes for Sass, and if she has a presentation as well.
I'm the presentation. Charot. Timer starts now. Char. Okay. I think I have to make my position clear on drugs in general. Shabu must be totally eliminated from Philippine society. As in 100% eliminated. There are only two countries in the world where Shabu was fully legal. Well, crystal meth. Japan and Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, but they used the drugs to drug their soldiers, right? The Japanese used it to drug their soldiers as well as Nazi Germany. And then because it was freely available, they saw immediately the bad consequences of crystal meth. There were rising crimes of rape, etc. So they proceeded from legalization to criminalization. So the talk of crystal meth, or legalizing crystal meth, or even the softer decriminalizing crystal meth, it's kind of unheard of because we are the only country, we are one of the top crystal meth users countries in the world. The examples in Europe, Portugal, Netherlands, etc., crystal meth is not the number one narcotics in their country. It's cannabis. When you smoke marijuana, you're happy. You don't go out and kill people. You don't go out and rape people. And I know it because I live in the Netherlands wherein you can freely smoke cannabis. And truth be told, you will never see anyone fighting inside a cafe wherein they smoke marijuana. You would see people fighting in football stadiums during a football fight or in a club wherein they drink alcohol. And that brings me to my second point about drugs. For me, I agree with reforming this judiciary, etc. I think we all agree with it. But another important thing that we should note is that we should recalibrate and relax our drug law, right? We should be really strict on shabu, no doubt about it. But with other drugs, we should reclassify them. We should be more understanding of the specific effect of different narcotics, right? Alcohol is a narcotic. You can drink, everyone can drink it, I'm sure. Even your 15 or 14-year-old kids or 16-year-old kids drink it. And alcohol, oh my God, it messes up with your brain. It messes up with your brain more than, like, for example, marijuana does. And it's scientifically proven fact, right? It messes up with your brain compared to other narcotics that are considered illegal in a lot of countries. So I believe that we should try to revisit our drug laws, right? And that will also help us fight this drug war better, right? Instead of stretching our resources, fighting every kind of drug, we focus on the most harmful, most disruptive drug there is in our society, and that is shabu, right? That's why I don't really, you wouldn't see in my page celebrating anyone being caught with marijuana. Because I know the effect of marijuana. I live in a country where you can freely smoke marijuana. I don't do that. In fact, I actually support the legalization of cannabis. And I don't know the position of Richard here. I think we spoke about this, and he said that he support medical cannabis. Me, I support medical and recreational because the only difference between the two is that the other one would be penalized because they abuse the the prescription for medical cannabis, right? And then you open up another opportunity for corruption. So you just legalize it and then regulate the use of cannabis. Regulate it, just like what the Dutch do. You can only smoke it at a specific area. If you bring it outside, it will be confiscated. So instead of just, focusing on these softer substances, let's focus on the real thing. Shabu is the real scourge in our society. And in fact, it's the most abused narcotics in our country, right? So let's focus on it. Second, fourth, I agree with Heydarian about the status of the police force. And I think Duterte mentioned this several times. He realized that 40% of our police force is involved in the illegal activity, right? And he acknowledges this. The thing is, he inherited this system. He didn't create this system. And some people in the opposition try to paint that he created the system by, having this harsh stance against drugs. But the system that system already existed before he came. I agree that he should focus more. A lot of attention should be focused more in reforming the police force, and I hope that President Duterte would do this in the last 3 years of his life. Of his life as president, because after that, he would just be a doting grandfather, right? I'm so sorry po. Huwag niyo po akong batuhin. I believe that President Duterte should focus more on reforming the police force. Because after him, I don't know anyone else who could reform the police force. Right? Because he's a very disciplinarian. He speaks with such authority, and he gets things done. So if he cannot do this in his term, what's going to happen to our country with 40% of your police force involved in illegal activity? Right? I think there should be more prosecution, more news about police involved in crimes, being held accountable, because that would restore our faith in the police force, right? Because if the President Duterte doesn't have faith in it, right? He speaks with such despair, right? That, he even says that his drug war is kind of a failure, right? Because the influx of shabu kept on intensifying, etc. And I believe it's because of the fact that a lot of people in the police force are involved in it. I remember during the first few weeks of his presidency that he announces this list of police officers involved in drugs, right? He began it with the 5 generals, narco generals. I really wonder where they are now. Right? Where are they now? I think we should ask that. Instead of just asking, why is Peter Lim still alive, or why is he still out there? At least there is a case filed against Peter Lim. But these 5 generals, where are they? Nandito ba sila? Char. Where are they? And I think we owe this not just to the future generation, but to those people who have been collateral damage to this drug war, that we make sure that our police force, after Duterte, would become much better than when he first arrived at office. And the opposition, I think, has the job to help Duterte in cleaning the police force. Right? Instead of just focusing their attention in creating this stupid Bikoy video, implicating a 14-year-old kid as a recipient of drug war, why don't you start exposing the police officers who are involved in the illegal drug activities, right? So that even when you become in power, you would have an easier time solving the shoe problem of this society. So he helped Duterte instead to clean the police force, expose them. Yung gumawa ng Bikoy video, yung mga police na tiwali na lang yung tirahin ninyo. Di ba? Pagubarin nyo rin. Di ba? Baka may mga tattoo rin yan. Di ba? So I think focus in it. Last thing about the drug war, I think Duterte has been unfairly criticized about this one. I agree that there are times that he might be a little harsh, right? Especially when employs psych war against the criminals, right? He's saying, papatayin ko kayo, etc. This is part of psych war tactics, right? Because these criminals do not recognize soft words. If you just say Heydarian to them that you're gonna be prosecuted, and then they carry guns, what's the match of your prosecution with their guns, right? So I think we should also credit him. Although that I would agree with Duterte with his evaluation of his work. He just said that he thinks that he did okay. Pasang awa. I agree with him, right? We notice a million people surrendering, volunteering themselves. Some of those were forced, of course. We saw that there have been around, according to the latest figures of PNP, what's it called? What was it called? The real numbers details. Ano na lang to, 30 seconds. Real numbers details, they have been around
Hashtag real numbers.
Hashtag real numbers. Around 180,000 drug operations since 2016. And out of 180,000, around 174, 75, 76,000 were arrested. They were all alive. Right? Around 6,000, give and take, were dead. So, given my not so competent math skills, we could say that 2 to 3% died in drug operations, while 98%, 97 to 98% were actually alive. So this is actually, given that figure, this drug war actually is not a really inhumane drug war, although I would recognize that there are people that should be prosecuted for the wrongful arrests that they have committed and the deaths that they have caused, right? Because of mistaken identity, etc. But that doesn't define the drug war of Duterte. What defined the drug war of Duterte is that a lot of people were arrested. A lot of people surrendered. Suddenly, we have more rehabilitation centers, right? Last year, was it Bahay Silangan, Bahay Silay was instituted by the Duterte administration. And I think those things should be highlighted at the same time as pursuing justice for those who are wrongly accused and those who experience injustice from the hands of our police force. Thank you.
Can you answer and tell our viewers and our live audience, do you believe that extrajudicial killings exist right now under the administration? And are they connected, or can they be connected with the administration or not? So on the numbers and on EJ case specifically. Richard will go first again.
You know, Duterte mentioned that 40% of the police force are involved in illegal activities, right? Definition of EJK includes that the killing is not is a state policy, and that the killing was done outside the outside due process, and due process includes you protecting yourself against a threat. So if a police officer killed someone because that person or a group of person threatened his or his life, that's not EGK. Okay? Is there a state policy of EGK? I don't think that there is a state policy of EGK, but I do believe that there are police officers involved in the shabu trade trying to clean their ranks. And we know this during the hearing that was actually instituted by Laila de Lima. Remember that time wherein there was this family, there were these children whose parents were killed, right? They live in Antipolo. Yung mga magulang nila pinatay sa Antipolo kasi yung mga magulang nila ang tulak ng shabu. And the kids say that the shabu came from the police, right? So we all know that the police killed their parents because the circumstantial evidence is just too damning, right? So that's why I have to go back to my original position. The police force should be reformed. The opposition, tigil niyo muna yung pambababoy kay Duterte. Di ba? Babuyin niyo muna yung mga baboy talaga sa pulisya kasi Duterte will be out of power 3 years, right? You will have another chance to govern. But how can you govern with a 40% of police for involved in illegal activities? Right? You cannot govern properly. Babaliktad lang yung situation. Di ba? Ngayon, ginagawa niyo to kay Duterte and your police force is doing all these nasty things. Pag kayo na yung nakaupo, what Duterte is experiencing right now would also be done to you by your opposition during that time. Ibabato sa inyo yung sise to whatever that these corrupt police officers are doing. Okay. Now, I'd just like to respond to the China-Philippine cooperation. There is actually a good model for that. In Czech Republic, ang mga number one na tulak pushers ng crystal meth were actually Vietnamese. Right? So the Vietnamese were being blamed for that. So what the Czech Republic and Vietnam did, they actually did partnership in order to make sure that the shabu, the crystal meth problem in Czech Republic is solved. So there is actually a good model for cooperation for that, and that's why it's very important that we do not demonize China all the time. If you would like to cooperate with someone, you approach them as a friend. It is better to fight with your friend than your enemy, because when friends fight, they seek an amicable solution. When enemies fight, they have to kill each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Sass.
Round of applause. I know there's so much anxiety, nervousness, all that stuff. There you go. That's what this is about. Right? Right?